Hello there, everyone. My name is Crazy Caleb, and today we're going to be continuing our way with the Not Modded Module series, and today we're going to be taking a look at Not X01. So this is Not X01, and the biggest difference that you can see from it is normally the read is given at 10 o'clock and read clockwise in this case, and in this case we normally start at a red-black segment. However, at 10 o'clock in this case it is a green-tan segment. So in this case, for Not X01, the way that you can tell the difference from X01 and Not X01 is the fact that each of the colors are indeed inversed. So in this case, the red-black positions are now covered by green-tans and vice versa. So what we're going to do is we're going to note down each of the colors, each of the numbers present on the module, and what we're going to do is we're going to select the bullseye to activate the module, and once activated, the module will hide the sector values and flash a sequence of 6 sectors with a pause in between repeats. So let's take a look at this module. So let's get 13, 18, 8, 6, 4, and I'm going to divide the top half from the second half by just a couple of spaces. And then we have 7, 5, 3, 11, and 1. And I'm also going to mark the colors just to help me keep better track of where we're at in the sequence. So green, red, green, red, green, and over to here, red, green, red, green, red. Alright, so now what's going to happen is we're going to get 6 flashes, and another way that you actually can tell Not X01 from X01 is the quality of the text on each of the numbers looks a lot cleaner compared to X01. I forgot to put X01 on here, but the text looks a lot cleaner, and X01 has a little bit of blurrier text. And another way that you can actually tell it is the center bullseye has a much bigger highlight in this case. It stretches out a little bit more. So that's the way that you can tell Not X01 from X01. But the obvious indicator being the colors are inversed. In this case, 10 o'clock starts with green tan, and the next one is red black. So let's get the module going. And let's note down the flashes that correspond with each value. Alright, so here we have in this case 4, 4. Then next up 4, 4, 5, 11, and I believe that was a 7, 11 or 7, 5, 7, 5. Just to make sure 4, 4, 5, 11, and then 7, 5. All right, and this is the sequence that we're going to be working with here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to alter the base set using modification. We're going to determine the base set that consists of the sectors that are directed by an odd number of true statements from list A. So let's focus on that statement alone. So we're going to go through list A, and we're going to be toggling different sectors, and whichever ones have an odd number of true statements will be considered our base set. So it is also important to note that multiple rules can apply for list A. In this case, we can have several different rules, and it's also important to note that this module does have 3 stages, and each stage will actually each stage will add 3 flashes per stage. It is also important to note that most of these rules will simply apply once, and once they apply once, what happens is you don't actually have to look at that rule again, and you can actually keep the base set from the previous stage and edit it from there, and make your changes from there on. So let's go through this list. Any partial sum of the flashing sector values is divisible by 25. Now, what exactly is the partial sum in this case? That is really weird. In this case, what exactly does it mean by partial sum? Partial sum is referring to simply adding each individual number, and I'll explain what I mean by here. So in this case, our first partial sum is actually going to start with the first number present, and it's going to be 4. Next up, what we're going to do is we're going to add 4 plus 4 in this case. 4 plus 4 in this case is 8, and 8 will be our second partial sum. Next up will be 5. 5 in this case is 13. 13 will be our next partial sum. So what we're essentially doing is we're essentially starting with the first number being our first partial sum, and then we're simply adding the next digit on. That'll be our next partial sum. Then the next digit, next partial sum. It's not in any order that you want it to be. It can't be, for example, like 4 plus 11 being 15, and that would be a partial sum. It does not work like that. It has to be within the order of the flashes given to on the module. So it's very important that you note that down in the correct order. So next up, 13, in this case, plus 11, giving us 24. Then next up, we have plus 7, in this case, being 31. And then adding 5 is 36. And this will be our last partial sum, but it will also be noted down as our final sum. It does the final sum and the last partial sum. The final sum in this case is actually a partial sum as well. So it's very important that you note that down. And I'm going to note down the final sum in this case in this case because it's going to be relevant later on, because some of the rules in list B correspond to the final sum. So we'll get to that later. So in this case, any partial sum of the flashing sector values is divisible by 25. In this case, none of these are divisible by 25. The only one that would be divisible in this case is 25. However, the closest we have is 24, which in this case is not 25. So in this case, this rule is not true. However, it can be true potentially on a later stage. So we will come back to that rule on one of the next two stages, hopefully. Next up, 3 adjacent sectors flash in clockwise order. Now, for these next two rules, these are going to be in clockwise or counterclockwise order. It is important to note that these do not mention that they need to be consecutive, but in this case, that should be kind of obvious, all things considered. So let's take a look at the flashes here. Do we have any 3 adjacent consecutive sectors flashing in clockwise or counterclockwise order? In this case, we do not. We only have 2 sectors flashing clockwise consecutively, but in this case, that obviously doesn't apply because we need 3 of them. So neither of these rules are going to be true because there is not 3 adjacent sectors flashing in a clockwise or counterclockwise order. Next up, 2 consecutive flashes are diametrically opposed. In this case, that is not true because none of the flashes that we have present have a flash on the opposite side of the end, nor do they have one that's flashing consecutively with it. So that in this case, that is not true. But diametrically opposite in this case, the 4 that we would have here would be diametrically opposite to the 1. And if we had one of those flashing after a 4, that rule would apply. And that can apply to each of these guys diametrically opposed. Next up, 3 distinct even-valued sectors flash consecutively. So what exactly does this mean? So for those of you who aren't familiar with the difference between distinct and unique, let me show you an example of what can work. So in this case, we have, like, for example, 4, 10, 10, and 6. In this case, it is technically 3 even values, but since these both are distinct, these both are the same number, that will not apply. And what we need to have to do is simply we can swap this 6 with the 10 in that position, and in this case, this would technically apply because they are 3 distinct numbers. For unique, however, what would simply happen with unique is, since there is more than one version of 10, that simply would just not exist. We would simply not take a look at that at all. But distinct simply allows you to have one pair present in between these guys, so long as they are 3 different sets, 3 different values of an even value. So that's in cases like these, this would be true. This little sector right here would count as true for the stage. So let's take a look and see if we have any of that present in our little pair here. In this case, we have 2 4s, which we said we have to be distinct. So in this case, this would only count as 1. And we actually have no other even digits present. All of the rest of them are odd. So in this case, this rule does not apply. Next up, our next rule is 2 or more pairs of consecutive flashes have sector values with a difference of 10 or greater. So let's take a look and see exactly what this means. So in this case, we have 4 and 4, which in this case is a difference of 0. So in this case, that is not true. 4 and 5 is a difference of 1. 5 and 11 has a difference of 6. 11 and 7 has a difference of 4. And 7 and 5 has a difference of 2. So in this case, no pairs of consecutive flashes have sector values with a difference of 10 or greater, and this is not true. It's important to note that it must be 2 or more pairs specifically. It can't just be one pair of numbers. It's a rule that I've gotten tripped up on personally, but just make sure you pay attention that it is 2 or more pairs, not just one pair. Next up, all prime valued sectors flash at least once. So let's take a look and see what numbers we have that is prime on here. So we have 13, we have 7, we have 5, we have 13, we have 3, and we have 11. 1 is not prime, nor is it composite, so just keep that in mind. So in this case, we have 5, 7, and 11 flashing. However, we do not have 3 or 13 flashing. So in this case, this rule is not true. Next up, any sector flashes 3 or more times. In this case, we have 2 4s and 2 5s. However, none of the sectors are flashing 3 or more times. Note that it does not say consecutive times in this case, so this rule will very likely apply next stage, perhaps. And then lastly, what we have here is no sector flashes twice in a row, nor do any adjacent pairs of sectors flash consecutively. This is actually one of the few rules that you actually will have to come back to if you happen to get this applied on the first stage, because potentially you could have sectors flashing twice in a row the next stage, or have adjacent pairs of sectors flashing consecutively. So in this case, let's take a look. Both of these cases have to not apply in this order for this to be true. So, no sector flashes twice in a row. Well, that's already been broken because there are 2 4s flashing twice in a row. So in this case, a sector does flash twice in a row, so this rule is already automatically false. And to add more of a reason why this does not apply, in this case, we take a look at the 7 and the 5. Those 2 are consecutively flashing, and they are adjacent, so in this case, that is not true. So in this case, we actually don't have any rules that apply in this list A, so let's take a look at list B, and we need to alter the base set using the modifications that correspond to the first true statement in list B. So for list B now, we're going to be taking a look at the first true statement from top to bottom. We're simply not going to have multiple rules apply as we normally would with list A. We're simply going to take a look at the first rule. So in this case, we had no rules that applied at all, and what happens to be our first rule, the base set is indeed empty. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to select the sectors for submission phase. This is where we're going to be selecting and submitting this stage. We're going to select the sectors that are composite valued. So in this case, what composite valued is numbers that aren't 1 and aren't prime in this case. So let's go through each of these guys going clockwise. And what we're going to do is we're going to select the sectors, and the second we select one sector, the flashing will stop. So let's just be careful with that. So in this case, 13 is a prime number, not composite. 18 is composite. 8 is composite, 6 is composite, 4 is composite, 7 is prime, 5 is prime, 3 is prime, 11 is prime, and 1 is not composite, nor is it prime. So in this case, we're only going to submit these 4 values because these are the only 4 that are true. We'll hit the bullseye to submit the stage, it'll circle around, and we'll hear that little ding to mean that the stage is correct. So now, as I said before, we're going to progress through 3 stages, and each of the stages will have an additional 3 flashes per stage. So let's take a look here. Our last flash was at the 5. So in this case, we're going to be adding 7. We're going to add 7, 18, and in this case, it will be 5. 7, 18, and 5. And these will be our 3 new flashes. So let's also get the partial sums for these guys real quick too, because these partial sums are going to be important later on. So from the 36, we're going to add 7 again. To 43. We're going to add 18, which is 61. And then we're going to add 5, giving us now a final sum of 66. However, this will also be included as a partial sum as well. So let's take a look. So now we're going to have to go through all of these rules again, because we simply do not have any that applied, and some things are bound to change, as I can already see one rule that is definitely changed here. So let's take a look. Any partial sum of flashing sector values is divisible by 25. Let's take a look for either 25 or 50 or 75, and we actually don't have any of those values present in our partial sums. So in this case, this rule is not true. Next up, 3 adjacent sectors flashed in clockwise order. Do we have any of that present? No, we do not. Same thing for the anti-clockwise, we do not have any of those present. Next up, 2 consecutive flashes are diametrically opposed, and if you take a look at these last 2 flashes, they are indeed diametrically opposed. 2 consecutive flashes are now diametrically opposed, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to toggle the sectors that are diametrically opposite a prime valued sector. So now here's where the whole determine the base set that it consists of a sector that are directed by an odd number of true statements. This is where this part's going to come in. So in this case, since this will be the first true rule for whatever sectors we get that apply to this case, that will be considered part of our base set. Now, this obviously doesn't mean we're quite done yet, because we have to go through the rest of these rules down here. And I also forgot to mention that we are, in this case, we're going to be not ever doing this rule again, because we simply will never apply to that rule, since there was a sector that flashes twice in a row. So, now let's take a look here. So we're gonna toggle the sectors, which is going to be in our base set, by the that are diametrically opposite a prime valued sector. So in this case, let's take a look at the prime valued sectors that we have. So we have 13, and now what we're going to do is we're going to do the one that is directly opposite. And the way that I set up the setting on my notes here is such that we can simply just find the position of whatever prime number we have in this case, and simply just put it in the position that is on the opposite side of the board. So in this case, And just to see that if that rings true, the green in this case, which is 13, is opposite to the 7, which is where we need to be putting it, which is diametrically opposed. So that is perfect. So in this case, our 13 is going to be toggling the 7 over here. 18 is not prime, 8 is not prime, 6 is not prime, 4 is not prime, 7 is prime, so we're going to go back to that 13 and toggle that as well. The 5 is going to be, the 5 is also prime, so we're going to do the diametrically opposite of that, which is 18. 3 is also prime, so we're going to toggle that guy as well, so 8. And we're going to toggle the diametrically opposite from 11, which in this case is 6. 1, as we said, is not prime, so now these guys are part of our base set. Let's continue on. 3 distinct even-valued sectors flash consecutively. In this case, that is not true. We don't even actually have 3 distinct even numbers that flashed in this case, so that is not true. Next up, 2 or more pairs of consecutive flashes have sector values with a difference of 10 or greater. In this case, actually, let's take a look at this 18 right here. So 7 and 18 have a difference of 11. So in this case, they have a difference of 11, and the 18 and the 5 have a difference of 13, both of which have a difference of 10 or greater. And in this case, that is 2 or more pairs of consecutive flashes. So in this case, this rule does apply. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to toggle the sectors that have sector values of 10 or greater. So taking a look back up here, now some of these guys from our base set originally that were toggled beforehand have a value that is 10 or greater. So now what we're going to be doing is with the asterisk above it, we're simply just going to be getting rid of it, because now it has an even number of true statements. So 13 is going to get rid of, 18 is going to get rid of, 8, 6, and 4 are not greater than 10, 11 is greater is 10 or greater. So in this case, this is our new base set for right now. Next up, all prime valued sectors have flashed at least once. 13 still has yet to flash, so in this case that is not true. And lastly, any sector flashes 3 or more times. Let's take a look here. We actually have 3 5s in our sequence. That is indeed true. So now what we're going to be doing is for our last toggle here, we're going to toggle the sectors that are red-black in this case. And this is why I noted down the positions that have red in them, so that we can just simply toggle them to be in our base set. In this case, the red for 18 is going to be toggled, the 6 for red is going to be toggled, the red that's going to be 7 is toggled, the 3 that is red, that's going to be toggled, and the 1 that is red, that's going to be toggled as well. And now we have reached the end of our rules because we simply do not have to look at this rule again. And what we're going to be doing is going to go through list B and find the first rule that applies. The base set is now no longer empty, so this first rule does not apply. Next up, the final sum. Taking a look here. The final sum is divisible by any partial sum other than the first in itself. So the first in this case, as we mentioned before, will always be the first flash in this case in the sequence, and it can't be divisible by itself. So let's find and see if we can figure out if any of these guys are divisible by are able to divide 66 perfectly. In this case, let's try out the numbers. So 66 divided by 8 is 8.25, so it's not perfect. 66 divided by 13, not perfect. 24, 66 divided by 24 is 2.75, nope. 66 divided by 31, nope. 66 divided by 36 is going to be, nope, not true. And then at this point, since we've gone over half, that already means that the rest of these guys cannot be perfectly divisible. So in this case, that rule is not true. There is no final sum, there's no partial sum that is able to divide the partial sum, other than the first in itself. Next up, the final sum is prime. In this case, that is not true. It is an even digit that is greater than 2, so in this case, the final sum is not prime. Next up, there are 3 or more prime partial sums, and in this case, let's take a look here. 4 is not prime, 8 is not prime, 13 is indeed prime, so in this case, that is 1. 31 is prime, so that is 2. And then next up, let's take a look here. And just to make sure, I believe 43 and 61 are also both prime, but I want to double check that, so let's pop up prime checker. Just to make absolute sure. In this case, 43 is indeed a prime number, so in this case, we have 13, we have the 31, and the 43. So in this case, this rule is true. We have 3 or more prime partial sums. And now that these are all 3 part of our partial sums, from before. Now what we can do is we can always guarantee that we will never go past this rule for the next stage. So it will have to be between one of these 4 rules for the next stage, simply meaning that these rules for the next stages we will simply never take a look at. I do want to explain some of the rules because some of them are a little bit weird. For example, the horizontally opposite a sector in the base and vertically opposite a sector in the base. That's a bit weird. So what exactly does this mean? So in this case, the vertically opposite would be corresponding to if there was a vertical line from top and bottom. So in this case, this guy is flashing right here, and the vertically opposite this one would be over here. And that's the way that it works. It's just simply another way that the that's also a typo, by the way, vertically. It's just the way that the dartboard is split in this case. It's just another way that the sectors are split apart. Same thing can go to horizontally. Horizontally is simply split across the horizontal line. So in this case, the opposite of this guy would be the one down below. So due north would be simply directly opposite of due south. So that's the way that this works. It's not the diagonal in this case, as you would normally do it. So let's take a look here. Okay, and then if there's anything else, one space anti-clockwise from the sector base, we're simply going to do the one space clockwise from the sector in a base set. Next up, the digital root of the final sum is contained in the serial number. In this case, we're going to select the sectors in the base that have that are in the base set or have a last digit that is contained in the serial number. So in this case, the selectors that we would select for this rule would have to be in the base set, which we would normally select here, and numbers that have in the ones digit that are contained within the serial number. So in this case, if there happened to be a 1 or a 3 in the last digit of the serial number, in the last digit of the number, which in this case is 13, would also be applicable. That's how that works. The base set contains 5 or more sectors. That's pretty straightforward. If it has 5 or more sectors, which in this case this would have applied because it does have 5 or more sectors. Or excuse me, it wouldn't actually apply because it needs to have more than 5 sectors rather. And in this case, you would select the sectors that are in the base set and have a last digit that is not contained in the serial number. That's the AND case. Just remember that you know your logical operators in this case, and or are very relevant in this, and you have to make sure that you read this carefully. This is probably one of the trickier modules, just because of the fact that it's very tricky to miss a rule because of just reading it wrong. But in this case, if no rule above applied, we would simply select the ones that are in the base set. So let's take a look at what we need to do for this guy. So since we had 3 or more prime partial sums, we need to simply select the sectors that are one space clockwise from a sector in the base set. So in this case, everything that we had in the base set, we're going to simply move 1 clockwise. However, I'm not going to move the markings. I'm simply going to go find the point and simply move clockwise from there. So in this case, our second point being 18 right here, we're going to move 1 clockwise to 8, and then we're going to move 8 1 clockwise to 6, and these will be our 2 sectors up top. Next up, we have 3. 3 in this case is dead south. We're going to move 1 clockwise to 11, then move 1 clockwise to 1, and then 1 clockwise to 13. And this is what we're going to submit for this stage. And just like that is the next stage done. So in this case, we're going to be adding on. We're going to be adding on U, U, and U. So in this case, we're going to add on 13. We're going to add on, and then we're going to add on 2 of the 5s in this case. 2 5s. Zoom out a little bit here. So in this case, from 66, we're going to add up 13. 13 will give us 79. Then we're going to add on 5, giving us 84. And then lastly, we're going to add on from 84, we're going to add on another 5, giving us a final sum and our last partial sum of 89. So now let's take a look at the rules one last time and make any final changes that we can to our base set. So do we have any partial sum that is divisible by 25? In this case, we do not have any of them present. We have no 25, we have no 7, we have no 50, we have no 75, nor do we have any 100. So in this case, that is not true. Next up, 3 adjacent sectors flashing in clockwise order. Note that it has to be consecutive, as I said before. So let's take a look here. In this case, that is not true, neither for the anti-clockwise order rule. So we've already done the 2 consecutive flashes are diametrically opposed. We don't have to do that rule anymore. Next up, 3 distinct even-valued sectors flash consecutively. If it didn't apply before, we simply added on more odds in this case, so that means that this rule will not apply. Next up, all prime-valued sectors flash at least once. Let's take a look and let's see if we can find anything that hasn't flashed. So we got the 13 flash now. The 13 didn't even flash. However, the 3 did not flash in this case. So in this case, all prime-valued sectors still have not flashed. So in this case, we're not going to be applying that rule. And now nothing for the base set changes. So in this case, let's take a look here. So this is gonna be the border that we're at right now. So if anything goes below this rule, that is a red flag already. So this is gonna be the last rule that we're gonna be taking a look at. But let's start from the top. The base set is empty. It is not. The final sum is divisible by any partial sum other than the first in itself. Now let's wait just a second. Let's take a look here. 89 is indeed a prime number, which happens to apply to our next rule, which is the final sum is prime. So in this case, this is our answer right here. So for our last stage, we're going to select the sectors that are diametrically opposite a sector in the base set. So since our final sum was prime, let's do that. So we have 18. 18 is going to be right here. We're going to select the diametrically opposite to this. From 8, we're going to select the diametrically opposite to here. And then from the 3, we're going to select the diametrically opposite from here. 11 diametrically opposite. And then 1 diametrically opposite. And we're going to submit the module one last time. And just like that is a solved module. The module does a little freak out and a little dance. And just like that is a solved module. As always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to stay crazy, stay cool, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.